The world's biggest trees are now thriving all across the UK. There's over 500,000 giant redwoods throughout the British Isles. Yes, ours might be much younger and quite a bit smaller, but given time, they'll reach the enormous scale of the ones found in California, in the US. This is the native home of these giants. But they're struggling here, and right now there's only around 80,000 of them left.
I'm curious about this. I have a lot of questions like, why have we got 500,000 of these massive trees when their home range is 5,000 miles away in California? And why are they thriving here when they're struggling there? And you know, I think this story hits on a really interesting idea about non-natives and how they impact ecosystems. Is it always bad?
I'll be sharing some of my thoughts on this, as well as proposing a pretty fun ecological idea regarding Britain's redwoods, which I'd love to get your thoughts on.
Just before we dive into the context of these trees in the UK, I think we need to really just learn some facts about these trees, because they are the world's largest trees. We can't just glaze over that. And yes, I am hoping that we can one day go to California and see these trees in their native range. So redwoods, they are the largest trees in the world, both in volume and in height. They can grow up to be 90 meters tall, which is about 350 feet. Animals like what I think is quite an ironic name, the wandering salamander. These creatures can live their entire lives up in the canopy. They're so big that they often have entire ecosystems functioning up in the canopies with other plants and trees growing up there. They also have this insanely thick bark. It almost feels a little bit spongy. This is resistance to fire and rot too.
I think this is quite a good example of just how thick the bark can be. And here's the hardwood. Obviously that's a bit dead now, but in there's your hardwood. That's actually sounds very hollow. I actually remember when I used to do my tree work and I used to survey these trees. It was always really hard because we had the sounding mallet, which is used to tap up the tree. And if it sounded hollow, then you know you've got a cavity in there. But the trouble with these trees is the bark is so thick, it just sounds like a drum all the time.
So the largest tree in the world, this is a tree known as General Sherman. I think that's a brilliant name for the world's largest tree. And yes, it's a redwood, but the sad thing about this is that we've likely lost even larger and even older trees. Redwoods have declined in California by more than 95%. This is due to logging. This means that we have cut down potentially some of the world's oldest and largest trees. Potentially some of the largest trees Earth has ever seen. I mean, that's a statement, that's a hard thing to prove. But these trees really are prehistoric. We have fossils of them which date back to the dinosaurs. There's a few pretty mind-blowing facts about redwoods. I really want to save the bulk of that information for when we do travel to California and see the redwoods there. You know, I just have to kind of save up for a plane ticket. So why does the UK have 500,000 of these trees when they're native? The only place they're native to is 5,000 miles away. How and why did they first get here?
It all happened in 1853. Patrick Matthew and his son John were the first to bring back seeds. It was actually John who sent back seeds and a letter which documents exploring these forests for the first time. Here's a quick segment from it which I really enjoyed. The whole surface of the ground is strewed with immense trunks, or their remains, in every stage of decay, in many instances covered with vegetation, so as to look like green earthen mounds, the mural vestiges, ancient camps, and only by cutting into them are they found to be rotten wood. I really like this, and I think it gives a really amazing insight into what it must have been like to be in this untouched, immense natural habitat. Matthew planted the trees in Scotland in 1853, and they still stand to this day. And later the same year, after hearing stories of huge trees being discovered, plant collector William Lobb headed to an area we now call the North Grove. And here, Lobb was lucky enough to find a redwood that had recently fallen, which he gathered shoots, seeds and cones from, and carried back as much as he could. He knew that these trees would be popular in Britain.
So redwoods at the time, they were rare, they were a novelty. You know, they were brought back as seedlings, as small trees. But I guess they also came back with these stories. They came back with these ideas of just how huge and impressive these trees could get. And I think the people of Britain, they wanted a piece of this. And that's kind of what happened. If you were rich and you owned an estate, or if you owned a palace, or you were in any way wealthy at the time, you wanted one of these trees in your gardens, on your estates, and you planted them. They are a status tree. I'm actually in a place known as Havering. This is quite close to where I live. This lovely avenue of redwoods was planted about 150 years ago, and actually here in Havering, this is the second largest collection of redwoods in the UK. So why are these trees thriving here? Why are they doing better here in the UK than they are in their home range in California? Well, when you consider the climate, it's very different. In California, it's much warmer, it's much hotter, and here in the UK, it's much wetter and it's much cooler. The thing about redwoods is they are actually an incredibly tolerable species. They can grow in a variety of conditions, but like all trees, they need water to grow, and we kind of have that in abundance here in the UK. So that's one reason. But another is that these trees, they are non-natives, which means that they've got little competition here in terms of other tree species, but also in terms of the pests and diseases. It's quite probable that a lot of the pests and diseases which they're associated with in their home range, they don't really have them here. And I guess the other difference is that, you know, we actually planted these trees here because we wanted them here. We wanted them to grow big and grow tall and stay that way. Whereas in California, you know, the trees are native there. They're thousands of years old. So it's kind of like they've always been there and they were always there in such abundance.
After they were discovered, redwood forests were hit immensely hard by loggers. 2,000, 3,000-year-old giants, the world's largest trees, were being chopped down. Over 95% were lost. Thankfully, in 1918, Save the Redwoods League was established and managed to hold on to that 5%. Between then and now, we have stopped chopping them down, but today they're facing new threats.
You know, there's so much more to speak about the redwoods in California, but I really want to save this story for when we actually go. I think the key thing to take away from it is that they were saved in the nick of time. And I think because we have so many of these trees in the UK, we have 6 times more than that of California, I actually think it's a really strong argument to have non-native species outside of their native zones. Now, this is my take on it. I would love to get your thoughts on this. But I think when speaking about non-native species outside of their ecosystems, I think it's really contextual. But if you consider a tree like the redwood, I actually don't think it's that much of a big deal. If anything, I think it's actually beneficial to have them outside. Firstly, for that reason that, you know, they are struggling in their home range, so to safeguard the species, having them elsewhere makes sense. They're also huge trees, which means they do store a lot of carbon. But what I'm interested in is their ecological impression on the landscape. How are they affecting the native species found in Britain? So on a small scale, if you take just this tree, or maybe the ones around it as well, they are doing so much for the local ecology. No doubt there's thousands of invertebrates, fungi, bacteria, birds, maybe small mammals living up there as well. It's doing an awful lot in that respect, but the trouble is, here in Britain, you know, we've so often planted these trees as individuals or maybe as an avenue like this. It's not really giving these trees the opportunity to show what they can do in an ecosystem, quite like what they do in California when they're found in these vast forests. So I want to propose an idea to you. In the UK, we have 500,000 of these trees. They're not going to be going away anytime soon. And if there's one thing that the UK needs an awful lot more of, it's woodland, it's forests, it's like intact patches where there's trees and there's nothing going through it. So just hypothetically speaking, how would you feel about a redwood forest in Britain? Just play on that idea for a minute. I love them. I'm actually really excited by the idea of potentially going to California and seeing these trees in their native habitat. I say potentially, I am going to do it. I just need to save up enough money in order to get there. And don't worry, I'll be bringing you along for the ride as well. If you've enjoyed this video and you've got other stories which you want to hear about, let me know down in the comments as well. It's always interesting to get your thoughts on what I should be covering here on Leave Curious. And if you have got this far in the video, then please do consider subscribing. I make videos about, I guess, nature restoration in general, all of the different stories, whether if it's giant redwoods or if it's, you know, like tiny little voles or whatever. I'm fascinated by it all and I love making these videos. If you want to keep watching the channel, then please check out the video that's on the screen now. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Leave Curious.